My name is Ava, and I'm 63 years old. If you had asked me a few years ago what my life looked like, I would have said it was calm, predictable, and maybe even a little too quiet for its own good. My husband, Paul, passed away when I was 55. Since then, I've lived alone in a small house on Oak Ridge Lane, tucked inside a peaceful neighborhood in Riverton. My two children have families of their own now, living in different states, caught up in the busy rhythm of their own worlds. I've never wanted to burden them with my loneliness, so I simply tell them I'm doing just fine. Most of my days used to begin the same way. I woke before sunrise, brewed a simple cup of tea, and took the handful of morning vitamins my doctor insisted on. Then I sat at my kitchen table with the local newspaper, the actual printed one, not the digital kind, and watched the world outside slowly come to life. Riverton has changed over the years. The neighbors Paul and I once shared dinners and backyard barbecues with have mostly moved away or downsized into retirement condos. New couples moved in, younger families full of noise, toys, and weekend birthday parties. Their laughter drifting through the street often made me smile and ache a little. Sometimes, when the afternoons grew too quiet, I pulled out the old wooden box from my closet. Inside were pieces of my past life, photos of beach trips, birthdays, winter nights by the fire, children with frosting on their noses. And then there were the letters, those soft, aging envelopes Paul wrote during our early years together. Letters where he signed every note with, yours. Always. I would trace the handwriting with my finger and feel his voice echo somewhere, deep inside me, but memories can only hold you for so long. Evenings were the hardest. The house grew still in a way that made the silence feel heavy. I often found myself turning on the TV just to hear another voice in the room. I thought companionship, romance, even simple affection, those were all chapters I had finished reading. I believed women my age weren't meant to fall in love again, that those things belonged to younger days, not the later years of life. Then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, everything shifted just a little, but enough to change the direction of my days. My kitchen sink had been dripping for weeks. I kept telling myself I'd get around to fixing it, but the truth was, I didn't have the patience or the strength to handle it alone. Finally, I asked a neighbor for the number of a handyman when the doorbell rang. I expected a younger man in work boots, rushing through his day, but standing on my porch was someone entirely different. A tall man with soft gray eyes, neatly kept silver hair, and a warm, steady smile. He looked strong, healthy, and carried himself with an old-fashioned kind of politeness. "Ma'am, I'm here about the leak," he said. I smiled. "Please just call me Ava. Come in." He nodded gently. "I'm Mark. Nice to meet you." Mark was 65, recently retired after teaching woodworking for nearly 40 years. He told me he still took small repair jobs because staying active made him feel useful and alive while he worked under the sink. We began to talk casually at first, about my herb garden, about how Riverton had changed, about how the small grocery store down the street had turned into a cafe that served espresso. I could barely pronounce dot, then our conversation drifted deeper without either of us meaning it to. I told him about my two grandchildren, how quiet the house felt lately, and even how I still listen to old soul music on Saturdays when I cleaned up. Mark chuckled. "Soul music, huh? My wife and I used to dance to Marvin Gaye in our living room until the kids begged us to stop." There was a gentle sadness in his eyes when he mentioned his wife and understanding. I knew all too well once he finished the repairs. He didn't rush out the door. I offered him a glass of cold lemonade, and he accepted with a smile, leaning against my counter as we talked about the old days, the town, the things we both missed, and the things we had quietly learned to live without before he left. He paused at my doorstep. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said softly, just to make sure the pipe holds. If you don't mind. A strange warmth rose in my chest. I don't mind at all. Come anytime. And just like that, something small but unmistakably alive sparked inside me, something I thought had been gone forever. I didn't know it then. But that simple visit would become the beginning of a new chapter I never expected to write at this age. Mark returned the very next afternoon, just as he promised. I heard the gentle knock on the door and felt a flutter in my stomach that surprised me. At my age, you don't expect to feel nervous over a man standing on your porch. But there I was smoothing my hair, checking my blouse, telling myself to act normal. He held a small, brown bag in his hand, brought. You something? He said with a shy smile, and sighed. Were fresh tomatoes and a few green peppers from his garden. You didn't have to bring anything, I told him. But the gesture touched me more deeply than I wanted to admit. I grow far more than I can eat, he replied with a shrug. And it's nice to share with someone who actually used them. We ended up sitting on my porch, slicing tomatoes, sprinkling them with salt, and talking about small things, old music, stubborn plants, the kind of weather that made our joints hurt. Somehow it felt like we had known each other longer than a few days. When he rose to leave, I felt a small pang. Something inside me wanted him to stay a little longer, but he simply tipped his head and said, I'll see you again soon, Ava. And I knew he meant it. A few days later, while cleaning the guest room closet, I found a wooden box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were Paul's letters, every one he had sent during our early marriage. I sat cross-legged on the floor, reading them, page after page. Memories rising like old smoke. His handwriting, the small jokes in the margins, the way he always promised he'd come home safely. It all felt like a warm embrace and a deep ache at the same time. I didn't hear Mark knock until he stepped inside the doorway. Ava? He called softly, noticing the tears in my eyes. I quickly wiped them away. Embarrassed, I found Paul's letters. I whispered, I haven't read them in years. Mark stepped closer, his expression gentle, not pitying, but understanding. May I? He asked. I handed him one letter with trembling fingers. He read it quietly, then placed it back with care, as though it were made of something fragile. You know, he said softly, I have a box like this too. Old photos. Notes from my wife. I keep them in the attic. Haven't shown them to anyone. There was a silence between us, heavy but comforting. We loved deeply, I said. He nodded. And we were lucky. Some people never get even one great love. Something softened my chest at that. I closed the box and set it aside, suddenly aware of how vulnerable the moment felt, but Mark didn't move away. Instead, he sat beside me on the floor slowly, gently, as if he didn't want to disturb anything sacred. We're allowed to miss them, he said. But we're also allowed to keep living. It was the first time in years that someone had said something I didn't know. I needed to hear. Days slowly fell into a quiet rhythm that felt new and familiar. All at once, Mark came by. Often, not always, with vegetables, though there were plenty of those, but sometimes just to sit with me, talk or laugh about things only people our age truly understood. How he misplaced his reading glasses and found them in the fridge. Or how I sometimes forgot what I walked into the room for. We laughed until tears gathered at the corners of our eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, I invited him to stay for dinner. It felt like nothing special, just roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, and a peach crumble, but the way he looked at each bite, eyes softening with nostalgia, made me smile. This tastes like my mother's cooking, he said. She used to make something just like this on Sundays. We lingered at the table long after the plates were empty, talking about everything from our childhoods to the odd ways grief sneaks up on a person when they least expect it. Later, we drifted into the living room where my old record player sat. "You still use that thing?" he asked with a chuckle. "Every week," I replied. "It still works, mostly." I pulled out a few vinyls and chose one almost without thinking, a soft, slow song from the 70s South. Mark's face lit up. "That," he said, "is a perfect song." When the melody filled the room, warm and crackling from age, he looked at me with a softness that made me forget for a moment how old I was. "Dance with me?" he asked quietly. My heart skipped. "Mark, I haven't danced in years." "All the more reason to start again," he said, offering his hand. I hesitated, but only for a second. When I placed my hand in his, something warm and steady wrapped around my heart. We swayed gently in the soft glow of the lamp, moving in small steps, laughing when we bumped into the coffee table dot, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel lonely. I didn't feel old. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt alive. When the song ended, he didn't step away immediately. His palm stayed at the small of my back, warm, gentle. His eyes met mine, steady, tender, searching. "Ava," he whispered, "I didn't expect this. Any of it, but I'm glad it's happening." I felt tears gather, but they weren't sad ones. "Me too," I whispered. That night, when he finally left, the house didn't feel empty the way it usually did, Dot. It felt like something was beginning quietly, softly, carefully, something I thought was impossible at this age. After that evening, the music, the dance, the moment where time felt as if it had softened around us, something shifted quietly between Mark and me. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden. Just a gentle turning of the heart, like a door opening after years of being closed. He began stopping by almost every day. Sometimes he came with a handful of fresh herbs from his garden. Sometimes he came empty-handed, saying, "I just wanted to see how you're doing." And sometimes he came because, as he admitted one afternoon, with a shy smile, "The house feels too quiet without someone to talk to." I understood that feeling more than he knew. Life had a different rhythm now, softer, warmer, brighter. Found myself humming while I cooked, glancing at the clock in anticipation of his visits. Even my morning tea tasted different, like something to look forward to instead of something to fill the time. I didn't feel young again. That wasn't it. I felt present again, awake in a way I hadn't felt for years. One afternoon, we sat outside as the breeze rustled through the trees. Mark was telling me a story about one of his old students who became a professional carpenter, and I listened with genuine delight. At some point, his voice softened. "You know," he said, "I didn't think I'd ever meet someone I could feel close to again." I stayed quiet, letting him continue. After my wife passed, I shut a lot of doors. Not just the emotional ones. I mean literal doors, rooms I didn't walk into anymore. Places I couldn't stand to see because they reminded me of what I'd lost. "I understand," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "But then I met you, and suddenly, walking through those old rooms doesn't hurt like it used to." My chest tightened with something bittersweet, a mix of gratitude and ache and disbelief. "Mark," I said softly, "I didn't expect this either." He reached across and gently placed his hand over mine. His fingers were warm, steady, kind. "You make the days lighter, Eva," he said. "I didn't realize how heavy life had become until I started spending time with you." I felt the air leave my lungs in a quiet breath. Thought it had been years since someone had spoken to me with that kind of tenderness. Years since someone had looked at me not as a mother, not as a widow, not as a woman simply growing older, but as a person still capable of being cared for. still deserving of affection. And it was a feeling I didn't know I could feel again. That evening, I invited him in for dinner again. Nothing fancy, just soup and warm bread, but he treated it like a feast. We laughed, teased each other, shared stories we hadn't told anyone in decades. After dinner, I played one of my old records again. Not for nostalgia, not for sadness, but because I wanted to share that moment with him. He didn't ask me to dance this time. He simply stood, offered his hand, and waited. We moved slowly across the living room, the soft melody drifting around us like a memory being written instead of remembered. His hand rested at the small of my back, steady and warm. Mine rested on his shoulder, feeling the quiet strength in him. There was no rush, no urgency. Just two people who had lived long enough to know the value of gentle moments. When the music faded, he pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. "Ava," he whispered, "I care about you. More than I expected to, more than I thought I could again." My heart trembled. "I care about you too," I said, my voice barely a breath. For a moment, neither of us moved. The room felt suspended in a quiet glow. Then slowly, respectfully, tenderly, he leaned forward. Our lips met in a soft, meaningful kiss. Not a dramatic, youthful kiss, but one filled with gratitude. One that spoke of second chances and quiet courage. A kiss that said, we're still capable of loving, and we're still worthy of being loved. When we pulled away, tears pricked at my eyes, not from sadness, but from something warmer. Hope. Later that night, after Mark left, I stepped onto the porch and looked up at the sky. The stars were bright, scattered like pieces of a puzzle across the darkness. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something rise in me that had been sleeping for years. Not excitement, not longing, but the simple, beautiful understanding that life was not finished with me yet. There are some truths that come late. In life, when you least expect them, love doesn't have an age limit. Loneliness doesn't have to be permanent. And sometimes the heart knows how to heal long before the mind believes it. I once thought my life was already written, that the chapters of companionship, affection, and connection were behind me. But I was wrong, because here I am at 63, learning something new, that beginnings don't belong only to the young. They belong to anyone brave enough to open the door when life knocks softly. And Mark, he was that knocked out, a quiet reminder that, even after great loss, life still has a way of offering something tender, something hopeful, something beautifully unexpected. A new beginning.